True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
It was a beautiful day on the California coastline when 20-year-old Deana Wild agreed to take a day trip to Big Sur with older couple Virginia and Billy Joe McGinnis. This is a popular tourist spot, but the cliffs are dangerous with unstable earth near the edge and the rocky Pacific coast below. Deana didn't feel well that day, but Virginia convinced her to walk along the cliff's edge and pose for photos. As Deana looked out at the beautiful scenery, Virginia began to snap the photos. Billy Joe put his arm around the listless young woman with his hand at her back as Virginia continued. Only Deana, Virginia, and Billy Joe knew what happened next. What we do know is that Deana fell to her death from the cliff that day. Her autopsy would show that she had clawed her fingernails into the earth trying to save herself, but the weight of her body, or the push of her killer, sent her plummeting to the rocks below. Join us at the quiet end for The Beneficiary. When Deana fell to her death, the idea of it being an accident was feasible, but further investigation, including earlier suspicious deaths in Virginia McGinnis's past, and a life insurance purchase made the day before Deana's death, with Virginia as the beneficiary, led Deana's mother and investigators to take a closer look into what happened that day.
So we've got a nice California beer for us today, Jill. It's called Enjoy By IPA from Stone Brewing, which is a very iconic brewery in California. So the idea behind their Enjoy Bys is that there's kind of a date that is best to have an IPA. They tend to get a little old. So the Enjoy By will say Enjoy By 7/1/14 or Enjoy By 6/30/18, stuff like that.
So there's more than one a year that comes out?
There's several,
oh,
yes.
Wow, okay.
So the one I had is an Imperial IPA. It's 9.4% ABV. Nice clear gold color, thick white head with plenty of lace. Good citrus aroma, some sweet malt. Taste-wise, grapefruit, lemon, pine, little biscuity. Pretty hoppy beer. It's nice.
Those are super popular right now, those hoppy beers. So.
You bet.
Yeah.
But the hops, not that they have an expiration date, but you want to have them when they're fresh.
Sure.
So look at the dates on the bottle or the can, and hopefully your IPA is less than a month old, and you're ready to go.
All right. It sounds great. Let's open it. That has a nice aroma.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Pretty beer, huh?
Yes. Lovely.
Huh.
Uh-huh. Why don't you bring a couple of those down here to the quiet end, and you can start out this really amazing story, I think.
It is. Really hadn't heard of this until you said that this is a interesting case to do.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly is. So let's look at Deana. She was born in 1967, and she had a childhood that was, let's say, less than ideal. When she was only 3 years old, her parents divorced. And less than a year later, her mother, Bobby Roberts, remarried, and this time her husband was a law student named Tom Marshall. Now, after Deana started school, she was diagnosed with a learning disability. Her IQ was determined to be about 85. By the time she was in high school, Deana was only reading at a second grade level. But she did enjoy socializing. She did have friends. However, in the 10th grade, she got in with let's say, the wrong crowd. She and her mother began to argue. Eventually, Bobby divorced Tom Marshall, the stepfather. Deana stayed with her mom in Kentucky. Now, again, they did have a bit of a strained relationship, but Deana always knew that her mother was there for her.
Well, it's certainly not unusual for a teenage girl and her mother to get into arguments and clash.
Really?
That's kind of the norm, right?
It sure is.
Yeah.
Now, when she was 19, Deana left home and she married her high school boyfriend, Jay Wild. Jay was in the Navy, and Deana moved with him to San Diego. That's where he was stationed. Deana would write letters home every few weeks, but her address changed frequently, and she and her mom didn't always stay in close contact with each other.
No, so we think maybe things weren't so great in the marriage. Plus, Deana liked to use some drugs and party a little bit. So in January of 1987, Deana called Bobby to tell her that she and her husband Jay were separating. Deana planned to stay temporarily with this older couple she'd met, Virginia and B.J. McGinnis. So these were the parents of a new friend named Jimmy Coates, apparently. That's what Deana said. And they would help her out while she looked for a job and an apartment of her own. After Deana was with the McGinnises, Bobby began to feel kind of uneasy about it. She called the house often until Deana warned her that she was disturbing them and she needed to back off or the McGinnises were going to change their phone number. So that was odd.
That's quite odd, I gotta say.
Yeah, because Bobby was not a domineering, overpowering woman. She was just checking on her daughter.
Yeah.
She was worried about her daughter. She knew she was very trusting and easy to manipulate. She wanted her daughter to return home to Kentucky, and she even sent Deana a round-trip ticket to Louisville. So Deana did fly home in February of 1987, but within a few days, she and her mom were constantly bickering. Deana angrily stormed out of her mother's house and returned to the West Coast. And the next Bobby would hear about her daughter, tragically, was in a call from the Monterey coroner's office when they informed her of Deana's death. So Deana had moved back in with Virginia McGinnis after she left Kentucky, and on the morning of April 2nd, 1987, B.J. McGinnis drove his Ford LTD with Virginia in the passenger seat and Deana in the back. They drove through the Los Angeles traffic and onto the coastal route Highway 1 from San Diego to Monterey to view the famous cliffs of Big Sur. Virginia explained to Deana that they were taking the longer coastal route for her so she could see the ocean views she hadn't seen before. Virginia had purchased a camera for this sightseeing trip, and they stopped at a roadside diner for lunch. Virginia bought Deana a cheeseburger, fries, and a Coke while they were there.
So as they approached the coastline hills and the jagged cliffs of Big Sur, the highway narrowed to 2 lanes. To the east, Deana would have seen the redwood forests of Los Padres National Park, and to the west the ground fell off hundreds of feet, with jutting rock formations over ocean waves. Now past the breakers, you could see pelicans flying low over the water, hunting for fish, and sea otters sunning themselves on the rocks. There were a few houses spread out among the hills, but they were generally further inland.
So B.J. had pulled the car over a couple of times on scenic turnouts, where Virginia took some photos. One photo was of Deana sitting on a rock wearing dark sunglasses, with her blue high-heeled pumps dangling over the edge. It was after 4 p.m. when B.J. pulled onto Seal Beach Overlook. This overlook is a small gravel-covered semicircle, about 20 yards in diameter, with boulders forming a gapped-tooth barrier along that cliff's edge. The northern edge looks down over 400 feet to a small cove, and down there's a large population of sea lions. So it is a beautiful sight to see, and this is known as Seal Beach. So at first, Deana said she didn't want to get out of the car. She was tired and she wanted to take a nap in the back seat. But Virginia was persistent, explaining that the fresh air would do her good. So Virginia, BJ, and Deana got out of the car as the sky was darkening and the fog was setting in. Virginia brought her camera and began snapping photos. BJ helped Deana into her windbreaker and walked her over to the cliff edge. As he walked her between the boulders, he had his hand on her shoulder, and they leaned over to see the seals. It was really a beautiful sight, I'm sure, but Deana was tired and cold. Just feet away, there was a jagged rock and just that seemingly beautiful endless ocean view.
Then at 5:15 p.m., Deputy John Burke, who was driving a Monterey Sheriff's search and rescue van, arrived at the Seal Beach turnout. The area was already overrun with people and vehicles, including ambulances, sheriff's cruisers, and a TV news van. A few families had even pulled over in their RVs and station wagons to see what was going on. Well, Burke pulled over near the center of the turnout and began arranging traffic cones and roping off the cliff edge with the help of deputies. And as they set up rescue equipment, he radioed for a helicopter. Now, when he had arrived, it was already half an hour since the emergency call had gone through. The sun was going down and starting to get cold. If the impact had not killed Deana, she was certainly at risk from dying from exposure. The ocean basin in Monterey is deep, up to 3,000 feet in some places, so it stays cold year-round, cooling the surrounding air to a bitter wind.
Yes. So it wasn't a complete drop-off. It was kind of a gradual fall and then a drop-off further down. So you just have to wonder, maybe someone could survive that if they just kind of slid down.
Before falling.
Yeah, if they had caught themselves. But from the turnout, it was impossible to see where Deana had ended up. Now, unfortunately, this type of call really isn't that uncommon. It occurs about once a month in this area.
Wow.
Yeah. They clipped a nylon body bag to a cradle used for moving victims from difficult spots. Then Burke and his partner, Richard Niemi, put on helmets and hooked their utility belts to a steel cable from the truck's spool. The ground sloped down to a ledge where they found one of Deana's blue pumps. Burke noticed some scrub bushes were bent over and some spots on the soil had skid marks. So it appeared that Deana had tumbled along the cliff's contour before plummeting to the bottom, so it wasn't a straight fall. When the helicopter came in and circled the area, pebbles rained down on Burke and Niemi. About 150 feet below the cliff's edge, Burke found Deana's second shoe. Then several feet below that, he saw some fresh blood on the rocks. As they continued to make their way down, blood marked Deana's path downward. Then, about 400 feet down, he saw Deana's blue clothing. He had found her. Her body was face down. She wore jeans and a navy blue windbreaker. Her left leg was twisted at this grotesque angle, and her head and neck were just covered with partially dried blood that had actually soaked her hair. Burke would say later that in spite of her terrible injuries, Deana actually looked kind of peaceful. He had seen many dead bodies over the years, and he had seen expressions of fear, anger, and even horror. But to him, Deana looked like a sleeping child. When he touched her skin, it was very cold to the touch. She had no pulse, so she had been dead for some time. Burke and Niemi zipped Deana's corpse into the dark green body bag, put her onto the cradle, and then the helicopter lifted her up.
Virginia had seemed distressed when the police arrived. According to her, Deana had stepped too close to the edge while posing for a photo, and she lost her footing. She had fallen silently. Virginia said they heard no scream, and that she and BJ were just unable to save her.
Yes, so they would actually say that they saw where she landed, but that was impossible according to other witnesses at the scene. So there's already one little problem with Virginia's story.
Some problem with the story.
Yes. So Deana's mom, Bobby Roberts, was devastated when she heard about the death of her daughter, of course. When she contacted Virginia McGinnis, Virginia told Bobby that Deana had been engaged to her son, James Coates, and he was just kind of an awful person. But Deana was actually still married to Jay Wild, who was abroad in the Navy. In fact, Deana had recently talked about reconciling with Jay. Still, Bobby accepted that her daughter had died in a tragic accident. Why would it be anything else? Deana had spoken fondly of Virginia and her family, even calling Virginia a surrogate mother. Now, in addition to her grief, Bobby had some serious financial concerns. Just paying for her daughter's funeral as a single mom and school teacher had left her in dire straits. There was a small burial policy of $2,500 from her employer, but the insurance company wasn't paying her. And this is a significant amount of money to her. It's in the 80s, so $2,500 is nothing to sneeze at.
Well, plus she's a single mom.
Teacher's salary, and
yeah.
they're just notoriously underpaid.
I bet she was having a tough time.
Sure. So months passed after Deana's death, and Bobby was trying to regain control of her broken life. She'd taken a leave of absence from her teaching job, and she'd begun going to bed at 6:30 each night and sleeping through to morning. She was deeply depressed, and her only solace were these long, dreamless sleeps. So she wasn't dealing with it that well.
Having a difficult time.
She didn't have a lot of support either.
Now, by Sunday, July 18th, 1987, this was 3.5 months after Deana's death, Bobby was back at her church. After the morning sermon, the congregation went to Fellowship Hall, a large room where parishioners would gather to talk and drink coffee. Bobby would have preferred to avoid this scene, but she had decided to approach a fellow parishioner who was an attorney. So she walked up to Steve Keeney with a smile, but still visibly grief-stricken, to talk to him. She explained to Keeney that a friend of hers had mentioned that he was a competent lawyer. That's a good way to start the conversation. I hear you're a good lawyer. She had lost her daughter in an accident in April in California, and her insurance company was giving her trouble over collecting her life insurance.
So I think this is reasonable. She can't afford an attorney. He seemed like a nice guy involved in the church, and she knew he was, so it seemed reasonable to go to him for at least a little advice.
Yeah, what can hurt, right?
Yeah, but what she didn't understand is he was a corporate attorney. He really didn't deal with a lot of things like this. So he had thought to tell Bobby that this wasn't really his thing, but he hesitated because she clearly needed help, and he could tell that she really wasn't comfortable asking for his help, so she must have really needed it. And she seemed like a nice person, so he agreed that he would hear her out. Her story seemed fairly straightforward. Bobby's daughter had fallen from a cliff while sightseeing in Big Sur. The funeral had cost about $3,000. Bobby's teacher's insurance policy would cover these burial costs, but not until the coroner issued a final death certificate. The Monterey coroner's office told her that the final certificate still hadn't been filed. But to Bobby, this explanation didn't make any sense.
Right. In a sense, it was cut and dried. There was a mishap at the top of the cliff. She fell. She succumbed from her injuries.
Yeah, it would seem that way.
What's holding things up?
Exactly.
So Keeney gave Bobby his business card, and he told her to call him next week, and he would see what he could do for her. He was thinking sometimes a letter from an attorney is all you needed to move things along.
Oh, absolutely, that's true.
Now, so what Bobby did was not call, but she showed up at his office the very next day. Keeney was surprised, but he had offered his help, and he wasn't going to turn her away. So the Amex Insurance Company, which serviced Louisville's Mann High School, where Bobby taught, confirmed her account. Before they could process the claim, they needed the final death certificate. Now, the certificate on file listed Deana's cause of death as pending. So Keeney had his secretary connect him with the Monterey, California coroner's office, and he explained the problem to Sergeant Glenn Brown.
Yeah, but according to Sergeant Brown, it wasn't as simple as filing an amended certificate with the cause of death. The case was still open as far as investigators were concerned. Keeney should send a letter requesting the certificate, and he'd get it when the case was closed, Brown told him. So Keeney sent a letter on his official letterhead and told Bobby he would see that she was paid soon so she could move forward in her life. But he really had no idea what he was getting himself into with this case. This was going to go on and on. There was a lot more to it than he knew at the time.
He's just going down into the rabbit hole now.
Yes, exactly.
So on August 5th, just about 2 weeks after sending this letter, Keeney received a call from Sergeant Brown. Brown wanted to let Keeney know that he had been contacted by State Farm Insurance. There was a $35,000 life insurance policy on Deana. The primary beneficiary was James Coates, who we've mentioned earlier. He's supposedly Deana's fiancé, or fiancé-to-be.
Yes, but that's only according to the McGinnises. Deana had never said that. So the chief of life claims there, a guy named Mike Hatch, had told Brown that Deana had come in and filled out a life insurance application naming Coates as the beneficiary. Once it was approved, Virginia had come back in and paid for the policy. And this was on April 1st, the day before Deana died. So let that sink in. 1 day before she died.
1 day.
So Keeney was pretty stunned. Deana had purchased life insurance on the day before falling off a cliff to her death. Didn't seem likely. Sergeant Brown was pretty stunned himself by this. At the scene of her death, the McGinnises were asked outright if they knew of any insurance policies connected with Deana, and they said no. So that's clearly a lie. They couldn't have forgotten overnight. These people were at the scene, and they were the ones who had paid for life insurance on her. But according to Brown, the police had only put together some notes and decided that anything about foul play was just speculative. So sitting in his office that afternoon, Keeney was thinking about the odds of someone being pushed off of a cliff for insurance money. There were over 250 million people in the U.S. and under 25,000 murders every year. So it was a long shot of about 10,000 to 1. Also, $35,000 just didn't seem like enough of an incentive to kill someone and risk spending your life in prison. Also, who would be so obvious as to murder someone the day after purchasing life insurance on her?
Not someone real bright.
No. But nobody ever accused Virginia of being bright.
Well,
maybe a little devious.
Devious, clever.
In some ways,
I
yes.
mean, this $35,000, it sounds like a minuscule sum.
Well, kind of, when you think about someone's life, certainly.
Right. But if you do several of them, it adds up.
Well, yeah, it does. Right. And I think that by having a smaller amount,
right,
there'd be fewer questions.
See, we're foreshadowing a little bit here, folks.
Certainly.
So later that night, Keeney continued to go over Deana's situation in his mind. He had never heard of a fiancé-to-be.
Me either.
Me either. And he wondered why anyone would be allowed to purchase life insurance based on such a flimsy relationship. So he decided he's going to call State Farm the next day. He had dealt with insurance companies before, and he understood that any interaction with an insurance company could soon become a bureaucratic nightmare. In addition, California was one of the toughest states when it came to life insurance payouts. Recently, the California courts had created a new legal claim called wrongful denial of life insurance. So unscrupulous insurers had delayed paying legitimate claims, and they would keep the extra month's interest for themselves. Now again, in case by case, it's not that much, but put them all together, it could earn them millions of dollars in a year. I mean, that's a gold mine.
Yeah, those big companies are just
So California
terrible.
Judges and juries had awarded millions in punitive damages against one insurer who would put off paying a $45,000 death benefit.
Yeah, for that reason.
Yeah.
So that might explain why an insurance company would go ahead and pay a smaller claim rather than risk this.
Exactly.
But we know that State Farm Insurance had very deep pockets. With $17 billion in yearly proceeds, he thought that they would rather pay out this $35,000 on Deana's policy than risk those punitive damages for balking. So this was just economic common sense. But Mike Hatch was still in contact with the police 4 months after Deana's death. That's unusual. So Keeney called up Mike Hatch, who immediately knew the case he was calling about. Keeney was beginning to think Bobby might be able to collect on this $35,000 policy because Deana's relationship with this James Coates was very suspect. Deana had still been married to Jay Wild, remember? So she couldn't be legally engaged to James Coates. If an engagement is even a legal thing. Not sure about that. State Farm would still be required to pay out the amount to someone, and if Jay Wild was found to be ineligible or he declined taking the money, Bobby might be able to collect under California's trusts and estate laws. But Hatch said he wasn't really concerned right then about who was owed what. The investigative work for State Farm was being done by their senior referral unit, and they could deny coverage completely if Deana had lied on her application, and no payouts were expected anytime soon.
Yeah, so Keeney asked, well, why's this claim still being investigated? And Hatch said that after Virginia McGinnis tried to collect on behalf of James Coates, all of the beneficiaries were interviewed, and they all gave the same story. But Billy Joe McGinnis had come in the same day and filled out an application for life insurance on himself. But because of his poor health, he had no chance of getting insured. So James Coates, primary beneficiary on Deana's policy, was Virginia's son, and both Virginia and B.J. McGinnis were named as successor beneficiaries.
So James Coates definitely had an alibi for the time of Deanna's death. He was actually in state prison for a parole violation.
That's a pretty good alibi.
Yes, he had quite a rap sheet. Virginia had made the claim for him using a power of attorney. Hatch conceded that the facts of the case were troubling, but the $35,000 was really one of the smallest life claims his company had that year. Keeney went to Bobby with what he'd learned so far, and he explained that there was a possibility that Deanna's death was not an accident. He told her about that State Farm policy. Bobby said that Deanna would not have purchased life insurance. She also didn't think Deanna would wear high heels out on a scenic day trip. Bobby had been relieved at first to hear that Deanna had found some older people to live with in San Diego, but now she really didn't know what to think about this Virginia McGinnis. Bobby really had no interest in the $35,000 for herself. In fact, she was disgusted by it. To her, it was like blood money. But Keeney explained that tying up the claim would buy some time to figure out what really happened to her daughter. So she agreed to that.
I'm liking this guy, Keeney.
Yes, he's kind of a hero of the story in many ways.
So Bobby remembered that the day after Deanna died, Virginia had called her. And she had seemed kind, telling her what a beautiful person Deanna was. She even told Bobby that she knew how she felt because she herself had lost her daughter in an accident as well. Now this made Keeney's ears perk right up. The idea of Virginia being somehow involved in 2 accidental deaths seemed suspicious to him. So with Bobby's approval, Keeney sent a letter to Mike Hatch to try and hold up the State Farm payout. And while they waited for a response, Keeney wanted to put together an investigative team with State Farm and the Monterey police. He asked Bobby to gather up any facts that could help and any letters or pictures from Deanna, since she'd known the McGinnis family.
Well, just after Deanna died, Virginia had sent Bobby some photos she said were taken on the trip up the coast on April 2nd, and she agreed to bring them to Keeney to look over. When Deanna's death certificate, the pathologist's report, and the coroner's register arrived by mail at Keeney's office, he was hoping all would be explained. He was really hoping it was an accident. The pathologist's report included a physical exam of Deanna's body and toxicology reports from her blood and urine samples. Her blood had tested negative for alcohol and narcotics, but 2 drugs were found in Deanna's urine, and these were amitriptyline and nortriptyline.
The report didn't give amounts, and it didn't explain the effects of these drugs. When Keeney looked into this, he learned that these drugs were the ingredients of the brand-name drug Elavil. This is a prescription antidepressant, the older kind. It's a tricyclic antidepressant. And one of the major side effects is sedation. So in the nortriptyline and amitriptyline, the nortriptyline is the metabolite of amitriptyline, so that's why both of them would be there. Deanna did have a history of using some drugs in a recreational fashion, but she wasn't a pill taker. And Elavil really isn't a drug you're going to take to get high anyway. You're going to do it for the opposite. Maybe you want to sleep or something. But if you take a single dose without being stabilized on the drug, you can get dizzy and feel sedated. So there's no street market for Elavil. Deanna had not been prescribed Elavil. So what are we doing with it in her body?
Yeah, so that's something they definitely needed to look into.
Yep.
But unfortunately, they didn't get the levels. They only said it was present. So there were some mistakes made in the initial investigation and autopsy. But fortunately, they had kept some blood, so they'd be able to do that later on.
Hi guys, Dick here. As we were finishing the recording of an episode, Jill said she thought it was time we put a new advertisement out. Here we go. If you enjoy True Crime Brewery podcasts, but are irritated by the ads, you might want to consider becoming a member. For as little as $4 a month, you can listen to ad-free episodes and also have access to a bonus episode each month. Now that might sound pretty good, but there's more to this deal. When you become a member, you'll get some swag, like a snifter or a bottle opener or some coasters, plus some other stuff Jill likes to throw in. I think it's a great deal. All you have to do is go to the website, tiegrabber.com, click on subscribe. It's that simple.
The pathologist's description of Deana's injuries included fractures of bones in her left shin, left knee, 2 left-hand fingers, her left femur, and her skull. Both of her arms and legs had abrasions and contusions, but the fatal injury was to her head. The base of her cerebellum had a shredding laceration, so the cause of death was basal brain laceration due to a basal skull fracture.
Now, if that's the cause of death, in a sense, that's nice. And she died pretty quickly.
Once that happened,
Once
but we
that
don't know
happened.
what she went through before that.
Right.
We don't know if she hit her head on a rock or someone hit her.
But once that occurred, death was pretty instantaneous.
Yes.
So the report also showed that Deana's fall was not a headlong plummet like Keeney and Bobby had imagined. It appeared, as you were telling us before, Jill, that Deana had tumbled down a slope, breaking her bones and hitting her head on a rock, breaking her skull.
Yes.
So like tumbling down the hill till you get to the cliff part of it.
Seems like it, yes.
So the coroner's register was the last document, and it summarized the incident. B.J. McGinnis had explained that he was standing alongside of Deana, and Virginia was taking their picture. They were standing with their backs to the ocean, about 2 feet away from the edge of the cliff. Virginia had finished taking a photo, and B.J. had walked away from Deana towards their parked car. When he and Virginia turned in the direction where Deana had been standing, she wasn't there. They walked back to the site and looked over the edge, but didn't see her. But they did see one of her blue pumps over the edge about 20 feet below. Looking out further, they could see Deana lying on the rocks at the bottom of the cliff.
And remember, that's really not possible. But that's what they said.
They said that.
Yes.
And it's not possible because it's not a straight drop. It's a gradual drop for several feet, and then it drops down.
Yes.
So according to the McGinnises, they immediately went to call for help.
Right. In the first 2 interviews with B.J. McGinnis, nothing was found to indicate foul play. Deana had been wearing heels, and they were scraped on the sides and the heels. Her fall was not witnessed, but the shoes could have caused her to lose her balance and fall. Though the report concluded that there was nothing to indicate foul play, Keeney did notice several errors and inconsistencies in these reports. The McGinnises had claimed that they pulled off the road to take photos of the sunset, but the sun actually wouldn't set in that area until around 7 p.m. There were no signed witness statements taken by the McGinnises either. There was no list of the people at the scene, and no reference to any photos taken at the scene. Also on the report, there was no mention of the McGinnises hearing any screams or calls for help from Deana. So Keeney followed up by calling back Sergeant Brown and asking more questions. Brown confirmed that no accident scene photos had been taken by the police. Virginia McGinnis had agreed to send the police the photos that she had taken at the scene. But guess what? She just never sent those along. Must have forgot.
Just slipped my mind.
Yep. In August, Bobby came into Keeney's office with the photos that Virginia had sent her. Keeney took the negatives out of the Kodak paper envelope to have them developed in case Virginia hadn't sent some suspicious ones to Bobby. Maybe she had kind of edited out the ones she didn't want her to see. But Bobby also had a letter of condolence sent to her by Virginia back in April. And Keeney read this, and it read, Deana was like a puppy who gave a lot of love and needed a lot of love. Deana enjoyed taking the dog out for a walk in the park and fields. I guess she stopped to look at flowers and nature in general. We left San Diego to drive north, and she was so excited about seeing San Francisco, Chinatown, and Fisherman's Wharf. Deana was just bubbly all day. Deana wanted to go back to college here, and we wanted to help her. Deana was a sweet girl, gentle and full of love. With our deepest sympathy, B.J. and Virginia McGinnis. And now I read it that way because apparently Virginia had this kind of syrupy sweet way of talking. It was kind of her cover to be this sweet, older, maternal person.
Yeah, it works. So the next day the developed photos arrived. Keeney spread them out in sequence. Each of the 15 shots might help put together a story of what had happened that day. So when just glancing at them, they seem to match Virginia's story of their sightseeing trip that ended with a tragic accident. Photos 1 and 2 were of scenery. Photos 3 and 4 were full-length portraits of Deana posing happily in jeans, sunglasses, and her blue pumps. Now, Keeney wondered if the high heels were included in the shot on purpose.
Well, yeah, I kind of wonder that too, like as proof that she was wearing unstable shoes.
Right.
Yeah.
Photo 5 was shot through a car window. It showed the McGinnises walking toward a line of boulders at the cliff edge.
Yeah, so that one seemed like it was taken by Deana from inside the car. So you kind of have to wonder what Deana was thinking. Was she starting to get wise to this? Was she getting nervous? In the picture, the couple looked like this ordinary working-class couple, but that shot really bothered Keeney. It was poorly framed, like maybe Deana wasn't quite as alert as normal.
Photo 6 was a close-up of Deana and BJ. They smiled for the photo with the cliffs and the Pacific Ocean in the background. Now, Deana was resting her head on BJ's shoulder, and she looked very sleepy. His arm was curled around her shoulders. Photos 7 through 10 were all shots of BJ and Deana in front of more cliffs and rocks. Then photo 11 was taken from behind, showing BJ standing beside Deana at a cliff edge. BJ's right arm was hovering at Deana's back, and Deana appeared to be looking down over the edge. The last 4 photos were more scenic shots. In the final frame, the view is down over a ledge, showing a beach hundreds of feet below.
So the picture number 11, with BJ's arm hovering at her back, it looks like he's about to push her when you look at it. So you have to wonder why Virginia would take a picture of that. Did she get some kind of thrill out of this? I think it's possible it was like a trophy to her. But basically, I mean, it all did support her story. While her son James Coates was in prison, Virginia said she'd brought in his fiancée, Deana, to live with them. She said she bought her future daughter-in-law an insurance policy, and the next day they took a trip. Along the way, Deana took some of B.J. McGinnis's Elavil. She got woozy and fell. So it made sense, kind of, until Keeney saw photo 11. Now, he actually had that photo enlarged to poster size. And to him, it was as if a new witness had come forward. Because when you could see it in that much detail up close, Deana and BJ were standing at the edge of the turnout, and Deana did look uneasy. The position was strange, too. The toes of her blue high heels pointed between BJ's feet, and her feet were parallel to her shoulders, but her face was turned and blurred as if she'd been moving it to turn and look over the edge. So it certainly looked like BJ had control of her and may have been moving her toward the edge. It also appeared that BJ was looking over his right shoulder toward the highway. His right arm was pressed against Deana's back, and both of his legs were bent forward like he was moving toward the edge. It looked to Keeney like Deana knew what was about to happen to her, which is a horrible thought. He showed the blown-up image to Bobby, who agreed with his interpretation. But they both knew that all they really had so far were their suspicions, and they probably shouldn't jump to any conclusions just yet.
Though the police had not taken photos at the scene of Deana's fall, the pathologist had taken a couple dozen shots at various points in her autopsy. So the photos showed Deana's body lying on the autopsy table. There were visible scrapes and bruises on her hands and feet. Her hair was matted with blood. Most of the abrasions and contusions were on her right side. Linear scrape marks made it look like she had slid down the cliff. And this is a 400-foot cliff.
Yes, very high.
Even on the Elavil, she would have been grabbing at anything she could to try to save herself. Her only fatal injury was the blow to her head, which could have happened by hitting her head on a rock, or she could have been hit with a blunt object and thrown. Then she would have slid down and grabbed at the rocks. Now, 2 photos showed black and blue marks on the back of her hands. Her acrylic fingernails were all broken off. So the broken nails were seen as defensive wounds.
Yeah, so we were thinking the broken nails were from grabbing at the rocks, but the pathologist thought those could be defensive wounds if she was attacked prior to the fall.
Good point.
Yeah. So that suggested that the injuries to the backs of her hands may have come from one of the McGinnises, either stepping on her hands as she clung to the ledge or banging it with a rock, who knows. But with these injuries and that life insurance policy, homicide really did have to be considered here. Detective Donald Smythe, a 16-year member of the police force who had been hiking the Big Sur cliffs for years, read the file on Deana's death, and he called up Keeney. He said that the McGinnis' story sounded hinky to him. He said that people do fall from Big Sur lookouts, but it's only when they try something risky, like climbing part way down or posing on one leg or doing a handstand, something foolish, usually done by a younger male.
Yes.
Also, no one falls without making a sound. If no scream was heard, the McGinnises would have at least heard her body hitting the rocks. Smythe wanted to bring the case to the DA, but he wanted to get all of the incriminating details he could first, and Keeney was happy enough to help him, so they teamed up.
So on August 25th, Keeney sent Smythe a 5-page single-spaced letter, copies of the cliffside photos, and a summary of the pathologist's opinion. More would be needed before charging the McGinnises, but this seemed to be a good start. Keeney was able to convince Deana's mom to call Virginia and record their conversation. A tape would allow them to go over what had been said, word by word. So in September, Bobby sat down with Keeney in her living room, and she called Virginia. After several minutes of talking about Deana, Bobby was able to steer the conversation toward Virginia's own daughter's death. So Cynthia, that's the daughter, was 3 years old when she died in December 1972 by hanging. Now, according to what Virginia told Bobby, they were living in Louisville on a farm, and they had some horses. Cynthia went into the barn, climbed on top of a tractor, got tangled in some twine hanging from the rafters. So she was found by Virginia, hanged to death by the twine in the barn. Virginia had life insurance on Cynthia and collected a non-disclosed amount in a settlement.
So also 2 years later in 1974, Virginia's second husband, Bud, had cancer, and she insisted on treating him at home. She claimed to be a nurse, but she didn't have a degree or a license. So Bud died in the home, alone with Virginia, and his death was also considered suspicious. He'd been overdosed with painkillers once before and survived, and then he died weeks later from what was another overdose. But it's hard to prove if that was done on purpose, because when someone's in pain like that, you give them a lot of drugs. You don't really worry about that if they're dying.
Right.
But we don't really know if he was that seriously ill. It seemed like she really kind of rushed him to his grave, and again, she collected life insurance money. So Bobby and Virginia spoke for over 40 minutes. When asked why she didn't call Bobby on the day Deana died, Virginia claimed that she didn't have Bobby's phone number and the police wouldn't give it to her. But Bobby's phone number was listed. Then Bobby asked about the Elavil found in Deana's blood. Virginia said yes, BJ had a prescription for Elavil. It's a mood elevator. Virginia said that the Elavil tablets looked a lot like Advil tablets, and maybe Deana had taken it by mistake. She also said she didn't know if Deana had taken one or more, but she didn't believe that it would make her sleepy at all. And she repeated a couple of times that Elavil did not make you sleepy. But then she contradicted herself by saying that BJ took the Elavil to help him sleep. But it's just strange that she kept insisting it wouldn't make you sleepy.
Even to the point of contradicting herself, right?
Absolutely. So she wasn't super smart. She was devious. Now, when asked why Deana had been wearing high heels while out sightseeing on the cliffs, Virginia claimed that Deana loved those shoes and wouldn't wear anything else. But Bobby knew if Virginia told her you need to wear sneakers, she would have worn sneakers. She was very pliable. So then Bobby mentioned the photos of Deana posing on a rock with the blue high heels showing. Virginia wanted to make sure that Bobby had seen that photo, and this seemed to confirm that Virginia had purposely taken photos of the shoes in case they weren't found after Deana fell, so she could show, yes, she probably stumbled on these shoes. Bobby approached the conversation as a grieving mother finding support from another grieving mother, so she really did a good job at this call. When she inquired about the life insurance, Virginia explained that they had gone in to increase the life insurance for BJ, and Deana had said, "What about me? What am I, chopped liver?" So according to Virginia, Deana wanted life insurance, which really made no sense.
None whatsoever. So Virginia had claimed that the coroner would not give her Bobby's number to call her on the day of Deanna's death, that Deana wanted life insurance, that BJ wanted to increase his life insurance even though he had none, and that her 3-year-old daughter had died of an accidental hanging. Now that just bothers me. I mean, how can you look at that scene of a 3-year-old
Yes.
found hanging and say it was accidental?
I know, and she got away with that.
Got me there.
Yes. And who really gets life insurance on their 3-year-old? Unless you're getting that kind when they grow up, they get money out of it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that kind.
No, it was purchased with the intent of it being used.
Certainly seems that way, yes, which is just unimaginable. But what bothered Bobby and Keeney more than anything was just how normal Virginia had sounded as she discussed these tragic deaths. Now they were convinced that Virginia was guilty after that phone call. Keeney was able to get a copy of the life insurance application between Deana and State Farm, and the only limitation for a payout was suicide. Murder and homicide were not mentioned in the document. It was signed by Deana in her large, loopy, schoolgirl-like writing, but the names of the beneficiaries, primary beneficiary James Coates, age 30, supposed fiancé, successor Virginia McGinnis, age 50, supposed mother-to-be, were all written in the scratchy, smaller writing. There was a witness signature, supposedly signed by a neighbor, and this one was determined to be forged by Virginia McGinnis when a handwriting expert was brought in. And part of this is that the witness's last name had been misspelled, and normally people don't misspell their own last name.
Yeah, someone forgot to tell Virginia that if she's doing that stuff, make sure she gets the spelling down.
Yeah, it's a basic thing.
Yeah, because that's an easy one to pick up.
Yes.
So a photocopy of Virginia's check for $68.10, payable to State Farm, was stapled on the last page of the application. This was the first quarterly payment. The life insurance agent spoke with Keeney and explained that the first time Virginia contacted him about buying life insurance for Deana was in late February. This is 2 months before she died. Virginia, at the time, had said she needed life insurance on Deana so she could get a passport to travel to Mexico.
That's not a thing.
I'm not sure of the connection there.
Yeah, there isn't one.
Then a few days later, Virginia called him again, asking more questions about getting life insurance on Deana because she was engaged to her son, James Coates. She brought Deana into his office, but Deana said nothing. The agent was looking into insurance for James and Deana, but Virginia said that's not necessary. James already has plenty of insurance.
Which we would find out he had none.
Well, he wasn't getting any of this either.
Well, no, but he didn't have any on himself.
No.
So why are you going to insure your son's fiancé and not him? The whole thing was just very hokey. Didn't make sense.
It doesn't at all.
So in late February, Virginia, Deana, and BJ all came into the insurance office together. Virginia said that both BJ and Deana needed life insurance, but BJ was not insurable because of his health issues. Still, Virginia wanted to insure Deana. She said that Deana wanted a $35,000 policy, and Virginia named who the beneficiary would be as Deana just sat there saying nothing. The agent had sent in Deana's application, feeling pretty sure that it would be denied. He said, actually no one comes in this office to buy life insurance. Normally we have to seek people out and sell insurance to them.
Right.
Plus, Deana's just 20 years old, and she doesn't have any children. 20-year-olds don't normally purchase life insurance. It's just not a priority.
Far from it.
Yes. The primary beneficiary, James Coates, never even came into the office. With 40 years of experience, the agent had never before had a case of one fiancé buying insurance that was not reciprocal. But the underwriters went ahead with this policy, surprising him. So Deana's policy came in on March 31st, and the next day, April 1st, Virginia and Deana showed up, and Virginia wrote the check for the first quarterly payment. It was Virginia, not Deana, who took the policy from his hand. And then as she put it in her purse, she asked, "Now this is in force, right? And it covers accidental death, right?" And he said yes.
Just covering my bases here.
Now, he did have a bad feeling about it when he sent it off to the company, but once they approved it, he let it go.
Yeah, so then a week later, this is a few days after Deana had died, Virginia showed up at the office to collect. She had a sling on her arm. When asked if she had hurt herself, she said it was just an old injury that flares up from time to time.
So you've got to wonder there, was this some kind of defensive wound from Deana trying to save herself from Virginia?
Yeah.
Because there was really never an explanation for why she was wearing that sling, and unfortunately the police never took pictures of her arms or anything.
Virginia then told the agent that Deana had died by falling off a cliff at Big Sur.
Well, he was stunned, let me tell you.
Yeah, but not Virginia. She is not at all emotional about this tragic accident. The agent asked for contact information for the coroner and police to go through the normal procedures. Virginia said that the police had put her through the 3rd degree, and she just wanted to know when she could get her check.
Yeah, and she was really more annoyed than upset.
Right.
Why were the police giving me a hard time, and when can I get my money, basically?
That's it.
So Keeney asked the insurance agent what he thought about Deana's death, and he said he might not think too much about it, but this was not Virginia's first insurance claim. Back in December of 1985, Virginia purchased a homeowner's policy. Then in 1986, she claimed $1,000 for windstorm damage. Later that same year, she claimed a $9,000 burglary loss. 2 days after that, she claimed an $800 water damage loss. That October, Virginia insured a Datsun pickup, and 6 days after insuring it, she claimed that her house had been burglarized and the pickup had been stolen. So the police eventually found the truck abandoned in a San Diego vacant lot. But oddly, the Datsun had not been stripped. Usually if a car is stolen, a thief will strip it to sell off parts. But the Datsun was intact and had been set on fire. The radio was even still in the dashboard and all 4 tires were there. So this was definitely suspicious, but they went ahead and paid the claim. Also in 1985, Virginia had bought a policy on a home in Palo Alto in hers and her mother's names, and then the house burned to the ground. And the insurance paid her $125,000 for that. So I'm just shocked that she's able to keep purchasing insurance. Because before she came out to California, she'd also had a couple of houses burned down. So Keeney's secretary started helping him out. She was interested in this case. And she looked into Cynthia Lane Coates' death, which happened in 1972. She was able to find the detective who had investigated Cynthia's death. This was Detective R.D. Jones. Now, he was still working for the Jefferson County Police Department. Jones shared Cynthia's file with Keeney. Now, he had done the best he could at the time, but Cynthia's case had been his first, and he knew now with his experience that he would have handled some things differently. But the case had been closed now for 15 years. Back when Cynthia had died, the Louisville Medical Examiner's office was not the best either. Coroners were elected and often didn't have any medical background at all. The majority were funeral home directors, but some were even plumbers and carpenters.
So Detective Jones had kept the case file, as well as some evidence from Cynthia's death. He had the twine she had hung on in an evidence envelope. Jones told Keeney that the case never sat right with him. He had not seen ligature marks on her neck, usually the first thing you would notice in a hanging. Detective Jones told Keeney a story about the day Cynthia died. This is a story he had never told anyone else. On Wednesday, December 6, 1972, Jake Miller, a police officer who lived across the street from Virginia, went over to help Virginia and her husband Bud with some brickwork on their chimney. Bud had become too ill to finish the job, so Jake offered to help for a small fee. That morning, he laid bricks in the living room, and Virginia was baking in the kitchen. Cynthia was happily playing around and ran through the living room saying it was her fireplace and giggling.
Yes, she was described as just a cutie pie, a rambunctious little girl. So Jake stopped working at 2:30 that afternoon, and he had a shift at the police station at 3. He was a little late checking into work at 3:05. Then just 5 minutes later, there was an emergency call from Virginia's house. Jake was called out there, and he was thinking, oh my God, I hope nobody got hurt by my brickwork or something. But when he arrived, an officer was giving Cynthia mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Bud was frantic, but Virginia was eerily calm. The police put Cynthia in the back of their cruiser and continued CPR as they raced her to the hospital. And Virginia rode along in the front seat, just looking forward, not leaning over, concerned about her daughter, not helping resuscitate her, just sitting there along for the ride. And after they got to the hospital, Cynthia was pronounced dead at 3:55 p.m. So at the hospital, Virginia was pulled aside and asked some questions. She said that Cynthia wanted to go for a ride on her pony. When she and Cynthia went out to the barn, she said the pony had run off. And when she returned to the barn after looking for the pony, she found Cynthia hanging by her neck by some twine looped over the rafter. Detective Jones had been sent out to examine this scene, and he found bales of hay stacked about 3 feet high behind a riding tractor mower. A cut loop of twine still hung from that rafter. But interestingly, the horse stalls were in a different section of the barn, not connected to the room where the child had died. So if she wanted to ride her pony, she wasn't even in the right area. So he took photos, and he coiled up the twine and went into the house to interview Virginia's father, who was living there at the time, Christy Hoffman. Christy told Detective Jones that he was inside of the house, and he heard Virginia calling for him. He looked outside and saw Virginia standing in the yard yelling something about Cynthia and the horse. Christy went out to the barn and cut the girl down. He tried to resuscitate her, but it was too late already.
So Jones told Keeney that Virginia did not seem very upset. She was unemotional, even cold. Another thing that didn't seem right to him was that it was a very cold day. It was December. The area around the farm was very muddy. It wasn't the kind of day to take a 3-year-old out on her pony.
Yeah, and I would have to say maybe a 3-year-old shouldn't be out running around with farm equipment and everything.
Maybe we could say that.
I think that'd be fair.
Also, Virginia had given 2 different explanations of what she had been doing when Cynthia died.
Yeah, so those narratives of Cynthia's death and Deanna's death kind of had a lot in common. In both cases, the victim was separated from Virginia for only a couple of minutes, and she found them dead. Both of them were DOA at the hospital. In both cases, Virginia said she didn't hear or see anything. She had just been minding her own business. And in both of these cases, Virginia had a supportive and easily manipulated witness on hand, her father Christy, and then her husband BJ. When looking over the photos taken by Virginia at the time of Deanna's death, Keeney's secretary noticed something significant that Keeney hadn't. The last 4 photos were of scenery. But think about it. If Deanna had fallen and Virginia ran over to the Coast Gallery store to call for help immediately, as she had claimed, the photos of Deanna and BJ should have been the last ones taken, right?
Well, yeah, I'm having a difficult time figuring out why you'd take 4 more pictures.
Yeah, right. So this punched a whole new hole in Virginia's story. After Deanna fell, Virginia had taken her time to snap more photos? Maybe she wanted to wait and make sure Deanna was dead. There was really no way of knowing how long Deanna was down on those rocks before Virginia called for help. Now, as I mentioned earlier with Deanna's son James, he had a really long rap sheet, but both of Virginia's sons had very extensive rap sheets. Since he was 19, James Coates had been arrested for assault with a deadly weapon, selling drugs, a hit and run, and burglary. And then, in 1977, James shot and killed a San Francisco drug dealer, and he was convicted of second-degree murder. While in prison, he assaulted another inmate, and then he was caught with drugs in his cell. But despite all of this, he was paroled in 1982.
And if you haven't kept track, that is 5 years into his sentence.
Yeah, so that's...
second-degree murder, assault, and drug possession.
Right, and he didn't behave in prison either. There were infractions in prison.
Well, Somehow he got paroled.
He did. Within 6 months, though, he was rearrested for receiving stolen property, and he got 2 more years in prison. In February of 1987, while he was out on parole again, he was arrested for theft. He was in jail until April 1st, the day Virginia paid for Deana's life insurance, and then he was transferred to the state prison. So he had a rock-solid alibi for the day of Deana's death.
Boy, I guess.
Keeney was able to find Virginia's ex-husband Richard Coates, who told him about other house fires in her past and other insurance claims she had collected on. But he said he was not the father of Cynthia Coates. He and Virginia had actually broken up in 1966, 3 years before Cynthia was born. When James Coates was released from prison, the first thing he did was try and collect on Deana's life insurance policy. And obviously they denied doing that. They would not give him the money. When no criminal charges were forthcoming, Keeney and Deana's mom, Bobby, agreed to file a wrongful death lawsuit. They knew that the McGinnises didn't have any money, but it wasn't about the money. Bobby didn't want any money. It was about holding Virginia accountable. So subpoenas were filed on Virginia, but she repeatedly failed to appear in court. She just didn't show up. So the judge ruled against her, and she was ordered to pay $250,000 to Bobby, plus interest. But there was no way she was ever paying it, and she never paid any of it. But Monterey County still wouldn't file criminal charges. So what Keeney did is he approached the authorities in San Diego with what he knew. Because the life insurance policy on Deana's life was purchased there, the DA there made the decision to indict Virginia and B.J. McGinnis for Deana's murder. But B.J. never made it to court. He died of AIDS in jail before the trial began. James Coates was in prison at the time of the trial, and he was called as a witness for the defense. And oh, what a scumbag. Oh, just an awful person. You can see his testimony on YouTube, and he's just yucky, for lack of a better word.
Makes your skin crawl.
Absolutely. That's a good way to put it. But the trial was actually moved outdoors near the cliff where Deana had died. They did that for 2 days, and jurors got to get a good look at the scene of her fall, get a good feel for it. None of the insurance money went to Virginia, her husband, or her son, thankfully. And the jury found Virginia guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances, which were murder for profit. That made her eligible for the death penalty. But on March 30th, 1992, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Deana's mother, Bobby, was at the trial, and she and some supportive relatives sat in the back of the courtroom. She was able to make a victim impact statement in the sentencing phase. But then Virginia was able to stand and make a short statement. And she said, "Bobby, I don't have a guilty conscience about what happened. Can you say as much?"
Jeez.
So what the actual fuck? She's blaming the mother?
Yep.
Trying to make the mother feel guilty? What a horrible, horrible person. That just confirms it to me.
So Virginia served 19 years of her prison sentence. She died in prison of natural causes on June 25th, 2011. She is 74 years old. Virginia is believed by many investigators and witnesses to be guilty of 4 murders. Her 3-year-old daughter, Cynthia Coates, Deana Wild, her mother, Mary Agnes Hoffman, who died under suspicious circumstances in Virginia's home, and her former husband, Bud Reardon. Each of these victims were insured, and Virginia was named as the beneficiary.
So basically a serial killer with a definite M.O.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, I mean, on the one hand, it seems so elemental that she should have been picked up before then, or identified. But she got away with it. And I suspect that if this guy Keeney hadn't been involved, she might have gotten away with this one.
It really seems that way. I mean, they had held up the death certificate, so there were some concerns, but they really weren't putting the manpower into it. So it was pretty good that Keeney did this.
And things were just kind of stagnant. They weren't moving forward. They were just sitting there.
So she kind of seemed to know what she was doing, though, with doing these smaller amounts on people's lives. Because if it had been $500,000 or $250,000, there probably would have been more of an investigation by the insurance company. But these are corporations, and they're going by cost-benefit analysis, right? So they're not going to put too much effort into that amount of money, which is nothing to them.
Yeah, for them,
spare change.
$35,000 is just chicken feed.
Exactly. So a big thank you to Nate, who recommended this case to us and even sent us a book about it.
Yeah, we were trying to get him to write the script, but he wouldn't do it.
I was going to say, he might as well have written it and come on and talked about it with us.
Yeah.
But he got us halfway there, didn't he?
He did. He's been a big help.
Yeah. And also thank you to Tristan Capel for doing our music. If you have comments, a case suggestion, or a beer recommendation, we'd really like it if you'd send us an email to truecrimebrewery@tiegrabber.com. You can also go to our website, tiegrabber.com, and you can leave comments there for us. Even better, we've had a shortage of voicemails the last week or so. So send in a voicemail. You have a very good chance of having it played on the show. Not much competition this week.
No, there's been a dearth of voicemails.
Yes, they've kind of fallen off.
So let's get out there, voicemailers.
Yeah. Now, if you would like to get all of your future TCB episodes without commercials and get our extra members-only episode each month, what you can do is subscribe as a tie grabber at tiegrabber.com. It's very affordable, and when you join, you have immediate access to all of our bonus episodes from the past 4 years. Plus, all of our other episodes will come to you without any ads. So it's a pretty good deal, if you like people like us and this kind of show. If not, what the hell are you doing here, really? Also, I'll mention that we have a Patreon page where you can subscribe for the ad-free and bonus content. For that, just go to patreon.com/tiegrabber. Also, if you do enjoy our show, we would really appreciate it if you'd leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen. Really only takes about 5 minutes, and it really means a lot to us. It helps us find new listeners, which is good. So, here comes Dickie with his feedback folder. What you got there?
We'll do a couple emails today.
All right, I'm going to give you the first one from Rebecca with a case suggestion.
My name is Rebecca. I'm from the Cincinnati area in Southwest Ohio. I'm a new listener, but very addicted to your podcast. I wanted to recommend a case, the disappearance and murder of Caitlin Markham from Fairfield, Ohio. Her and I both attended the Art Institute of Cincinnati in 2011, although our paths never did cross. She disappeared in 2011, and her remains were eventually found. There's a lot of twists and turns, lots of media coverage on the case as well, but still no real answers. The boyfriend/fiancé was heavily suspected, and another friend of hers also was. What I found interesting was the murder of 2 other Fairfield women between 2011 and 2012 that had similarities with the Markham murder. Now, there's an ID channel show on this. I'd love to hear you guys discuss this interesting case. As far as a brew to recommend, we have a Cincinnati-based brewery called Rheingeist Brewery. They have a wide variety of options, and my particular favorite is their fruit ales, which I think Jill would appreciate.
I would, I'm sure, Rebecca.
Also not beer, but we have a local meadery called Dysfunctional Delights that has some amazing meads.
I love the name. Dysfunctional Delights.
Cranberry apple, peach.
Blackberry, one of my faves. Thank you, Rebecca. This is interesting. I'm not going to go into details here because it's something we'll probably cover. But thank you for bringing that up. I wasn't aware of the other 2 murders at all. So we'll have to search for that ID show.
We will.
So the next email is a case suggestion from Lynn. Hi, Dick and Jill. I wonder if you're familiar with the gruesome story of Catherine Knight. So she sent us the Wikipedia link. She is an Australian woman who brutally murdered her partner. She skinned him and cooked some of his flesh to serve to his children. Only in Australia. Well, maybe not, but that's awful. So she goes on to write, I'm sure the story is pretty well known worldwide, but if you haven't already covered this case, I'm sure it would be an excellent story for your wonderful podcast. Wow. Thanks, Lynn.
Well, I, for one, didn't know about this case.
I didn't either.
So,
And we follow crime pretty closely.
Yeah.
So that's something we'll definitely look into as well. I would say at this point, 90% of the shows we do, we've learned about from a case suggestion from a listener.
Oh, you're right. No
Sometimes
question.
we don't write it down and we forget to give them credit, but it's definitely that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your feedback. Again, we are sitting here like some lonely old spinsters waiting for some voicemails. So if you want to have some pity on us for that, that would be really cool. And until then, we'll be waiting and we'll see you at the quiet end.
Yeah, we got some seats empty. Come on in.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.